Hello and welcome again to our series, looking at Jesus is Freedom. I have the privilege this week to talk to you about the freedom that we have in Jesus to worship, and our main point of focus will be on the book of Galatians. If you have ever read Galatians, you may know it is a highly emotional book, and one where you can tell that Paul is frustrated and agitated that the Galatian church that he had planted, which had initially started off so well, was accepting false teaching and being led astray. Paul spends some time in Galatians highlighting issues surrounding an issue of Jew versus Gentile that was being displayed in parts of the early church. Even Peter, who was an immediate disciple of Jesus, didn't quite get it. There were those that thought that this new faith was an extension of Judaism, and therefore to be a Christ follower you also had to follow the Jewish way of life to achieve it. As part of this, some Jews were insisting that the Gentile believers were circumcised in order to be considered a proper Christ follower. It is easy for us to initially dismiss this statement of circumcision, as it is not a practice we follow today as Christians. But the point that Paul was trying to get at was that Judaism requires obedience to the law, whereas Christianity requires obedience to the Spirit. As soon as you decide to live by one part of the law, you become subject to all of it. Paul even references how the law is a curse if you do not obey it. The law, whilst made up of several hundred rules, is one thing. If you fail to keep any one of the rules, then you break the whole thing. Paul is exacerbated by the choices that the Galatians have made to give up the freedom that we have through the Spirit for a way of life that is impossible to keep. Paul had been an exemplary Jew and had done his best to keep all of the law of Moses, but even he had failed. Having experienced the freedom of the Spirit, he was keenly aware of the pitfalls of falling back into that legalistic way of thinking. On the flip side, there was the other pitfall of taking your freedom found in the Spirit to mean that you had the license to live as you wish, indulging yourself in any manner of fleshly desires, many of which he calls out in chapter 5. Paul is telling us not to be bound by any one of the laws of Moses, and to not be fooled into thinking that you can do as you please. True freedom comes from following the Spirit, and it is worth pointing out that while some things are clearly good and bad, many things are only good and bad when the Spirit tells you so, and that may look different for different people. For example, for one person, eating meat causes them to stumble, yet for another, it does not. As Christ followers, we have a narrow path on which to follow the Spirit. This is the way of liberty. The late David Pawson described it as walking the narrow edge of Striding Edge in the Lake District, which is a narrow ridge with a steep drop on either side. If you slip down one side or the other, you hope that someone will come alongside you to help pull you up quickly, which is what Paul was urging us to do. The freedom that the Spirit gives us is the freedom not to sin. The fruit of the Spirit, described in Galatians 5, is like the law, not several fruits, but one fruit. Many individuals may exhibit elements of goodness or kindness, self-control and what have you, but only where all are present is it considered the fruit of the Spirit. So what does all this have to do with worship? We often think of worship as singing songs and playing melodies, but it is so much more than that. In Exodus chapters 25 to 32, the laws of Moses are laid out, laws of worship are laid out as part of the law of Moses. This is a whole 7 chapters dedicated to how we approach God. They are pictures of reverence, attention to detail, and more than anything, inaccessibility. The Holy of Holies, where God resided in the temple, or in those days the tabernacle, was the innermost room that was the most beautifully and intricately decorated to exact instruction, but only the high priest born from the line of Levi could enter it, and even then only once a year. To enter this space, he had to go through an intensive ritual of cleansing and sacrifice. Sacrifice was firstly for atonement of sin, and secondly as an expression of gratitude. It was so dangerous to go into the Holy of Holies that when the chief priest would go in, he would do so with a rope around his ankles, so if he dropped dead, the other priests could pull him out. Approaching God was a dangerous business and was never to be taken lightly. Reverence is important. As Jesus died on the cross, we are told that the curtain of the temple was torn in two, which was the curtain into the Holy of Holies. Jesus' death opened up access to God in a way never experienced before. Up until that point, There had only been individuals in a generation that could speak to God, but no others. Part of the freedom given to us by Jesus is access to God. The laws of worship detailed in Exodus no longer apply. We don't have to go through ritualistic sacrifice, cleansing, and being born into the right family to be able to approach God. Jesus paid the sacrifice of sin once and for all, and as a result, we can have access to him through the most personal relationship by having his Spirit live within us. However, the sacrifice of gratitude still applies. Worship can be song, but more than that, worship is an attitude. More than just knowing what Jesus has done for us on the cross, but realizing how life-changing that it is, causes us to worship. This spirit of gratitude is central to this. We can therefore worship in everything that we do. Cleaning the dishes, mowing the grass, taking a friend out for coffee. Whatever life looks like for you, you can be grateful to Jesus for what he has done and thankful for what that means to you. I'd like you now to take a moment. If you're in a group, feel free to discuss this topic amongst yourselves, but I would also like to encourage you to pray. If you do pray, ask the Spirit to reveal to you any areas where you may be trying to live under the law or under the flesh, which is stopping you from living in the full freedom of the Spirit and the freedom not to sin. Ask him to help you to be grateful to him in everything that you do, to awaken you to the reality of what he has and continues to do for you every day. I hope this message brings you encouragement and, more importantly, helps point you to freedom. If you'd like to discuss anything I've covered here, please do get in touch. Take care.